Good morning. Welcome to the CI Chit Chat on a Tuesday morning. And I am not Mitchell Hora. I am Brad McDonald, and we've got Blaine Groth with me. And basically, Mitchell's on the road traveling. So unexpectedly, he's not going to be able to join us today, but hopefully able to pitch in. And Blaine, you're also on the road here, but so it looks like you might have some internet issues as well. So.
That's right. I'm working out of a hotel room here in Jamestown, North Dakota. So nice, balmy -27 this morning. But up here to speak at the Evolution Ag Summit on biofuel policy and what's going on in the industry. So really to speak have ag up here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you being on the road, Mitchell on the road. And so, really happy to be here on this CI Chit Chat, though, to take any questions. And so, it's kind of an open ended forum, I would say, for this one. But just to give kind of a recap of where things are with carbon intensity, which is where CI comes from. Basically, where we're at is we're still awaiting the latest and greatest as far as what this new administration is going to be doing with it. And so, obviously, this comes from the Inflation Reduction Act signed in 2022. 45Z section talks about the 45Z tax credits going to ethanol plants if they are able to lower their carbon intensity or really their carbon footprint of the ethanol or biofuel that they produce. And the way that they do that is by either enhancing their own efficiencies, tapping into a pipeline, or buying a low carbon grain from farmers. And so that's where we've decided that at Continuum, the real focus is on soil health for us. But by focusing on the practices that improve soil health, that also leads to a low carbon intensity grain. So ideally, the the whole point of what we're trying to do is help farmers connect the dots. Okay, so the farmers who are focusing on the soil health now have this added revenue or potential added revenue if they were to sell into this CI pipeline or CI supply chain to the ethanol or biofuel industry. So all of these things just lead up to what I would like to say is just potential, right? And where we are with the latest and greatest with this administration is we still don't know how it's going to be facilitated. So the law itself started the clock as far as when biofuels would be eligible for a tax credit in 2025. So this is the law of the land, and this is where we are as far as um, technically every gallon produced since Jan 1 is eligible for a tax credit. And how the math works out is if an ethanol plant is able to get to carbon neutral, that all I guess the big goal that everyone talks about is this carbon neutral of zero, then that would be worth 50 cents or sorry, $1 per gallon. So it's 2 cents per point reduction starting at 50. So you don't get in the money until you're at 50, and then you go all the way down to zero. So that math works out to it can be $1 per gallon produced. And so we're talking about the most money ever thrown at this industry in terms of tax credits and the ability to be able to really get money flowing in the industry by decarbonizing the biofuel industry. So the idea is hopefully we can get farmers to be collaborative and capture some of that value because they're the ones who are doing the work to decarbonize the corn. And then what we're finding as far as there is a big lift on the data collection necessary in order to make it real. So it's not enough just to do the practices. You also have to prove you did the practices, and that all comes through data collection. Blaine, hopefully that recapped as far as where we are right now. And so, since we really don't know the path, and we don't really know how this administration wants to facilitate this law, we've been kind of in a state of limbo, and really what it comes down to is we aren't just going to keep waiting by as farmers. I'm a farmer myself, the fifth generation farmer from Northeast Iowa. What are the things that I can be doing or farmers can be doing just to be prepared to capture some of that value? And the key thing for me is it's still doing the practices and collecting the data. So the practices being cover crop, no-till, reducing fertilizer. Those are the big movers and the key things that matter. With no-till being a key thing, and really, if you're doing those practices, that's what leads to a low carbon corn or low carbon grain. And so, hopefully, by doing those things and then making sure you're out there collecting the data, and that's even as simple as taking pictures. When you're out there actually doing the practices, taking pictures, that's good evidence of proving you did what you said you did. And so by doing that, that's typically the data needed in order for this to happen. So um, at this point, that's the best thing you can be doing as farmers is being prepared. So preparing for the opportunity. I'm an Irishman. Preparation plus opportunity equals luck. So hopefully we get some luck with added revenue here. So Blaine, again, just kind of that was my recap. Any thoughts or
No,
considerations on
I'd
that?
second that. I apologize. Hotel Wi-Fi is not the greatest, so I'm a little bit in and out. But no, just really recapping on what Brad said and what I heard at least is making sure you make detailed notes or take detailed notes here this crop season for 2025. Keep great records, log everything digitally if possible. But as Brad alluded to in the USDA technical guidelines for climate smart ag, that there's some evidence that even has to be some pictures and geotagged and time stamped and everything there too, right, Brad? So showing viability of cover crop and taking pictures of residue before planting for no-till claims, to my knowledge or to my understanding in that language. So it's really just being being detail oriented and making sure that everything that goes on that piece of land is logged and has something backing it that's acceptable evidence. So really, the next thing I would say is, we have some options here that we can continue evaluating additional projects for people that maybe 45Z wouldn't be a fit for them. For with the mass bounce recommendation, there's obviously some challenges there for certain farmers. So if your grain doesn't go into the biofuel supply chain, then that's an issue, right? So there's other programs that we can evaluate for your farm because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is marry soil health and return on investment on the farm. So I would say that's really my takeaway as it stands today.
Great point as far as and Blaine, what you were speaking to is what they call MRV, measure, report, verify, what the protocol is, and that is basically the step there, the process that I was alluding to as far as proving what you said you did actually happened. And the way to think of it is every pass on the field needs some type of proof along with it. And so that's where the geotag pictures or machine data on your tractor, everything that you can to prove it, including yield data as well. All of those things go into that MRV proof that's going to be necessary. And then, yeah, as far as you mentioned the term mass balance there, and what that basically means is as of right now, from what the previous administration had come out with at the end of the year last year with the recommendations, was a mass balance accounting approach, which means the corn and the tax credits or the CI scores would be connected. So basically, you have to be able to track that bushel with that CI score all the way from the field to with the ethanol being burned in a vehicle. So basically, they have to track all of that all the way through the supply chain. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. And actually, I can probably spill the beans here as far as USDA and the IRS are asking for recommendations. And really, what it at this point, they came out with their own recommendations, but also acknowledge that with a new administration, anything could happen. and therefore there is a new open period for comment on these recommendations. I believe it's March 18th is how long they have it open for, Blaine. I can't remember the exact date, but I know it's sometime in March. But Continuum will be writing and coming out with our recommendations. But really, there's three key takeaways that we have, and that is moving away from mass balance, moving away from mass balance into what's called a book and claim type of accounting, which would essentially decouple. And so you would have the grain sold and the CI scores sold separately, essentially. And we just think that, I mean, really reflecting on it, it makes the most sense, both from a practical standpoint, but then also just as far as participation. So what I mean by practical standpoint would be I feed my grain to the hogs on the McDonald farm in Northeast Iowa. I would like to keep doing that. I would prefer not to ship my corn to the local ethanol plant, which is 40 miles away, and then have to buy to bring back grain and feed it to the pigs. And really, when you think about the whole purpose of 45Z is supposed to be decarbonizing or reducing the fossil fuels needed, it's kind of nonsense to pay for trucking that's going to be emitting fossil fuels on the road to ship my grain to the ethanol plant and then to also be doing the same, shipping the grain back to the farm, all in the name of reducing carbon emissions. And so, from a practical standpoint, that doesn't make any sense. But then also, just from participation wise, farmers who aren't near an ethanol plant would not be able to participate if it is a mass balance. And so just for the sake of being fair, and honestly, there's lots of farmers doing these regen practices that just do not have the ability to participate, and basically that doesn't seem right to us. It seems fair that if you are able and in doing the right things on your farm is, and when I say right, I mean in the terms of reducing carbon emissions, not necessarily what's the right thing to do morally, but just as far as carbon emissions, why shouldn't those guys be rewarded is the key thing. And so to me, it makes sense that you would move to a book and claim system, and that's going to be our number one recommendation here. Blaine, any other thoughts as far as book and claim versus mass balance in your opinion?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Brad. We think book and claim would be simpler, would be more inclusive to all farmers, and drive really the most impact on implementing these climate smart practices on farm. So I think you nailed it, Brad. We do have a question though. I don't know if you're ready to go to the Q and
Yeah,
A's, but got a good question from
go
Russ
for it.
Green here, asking, can you share an opinion? I can always share an opinion, Russ. Just
Yeah,
FYI, I'm full of.
got
Can
lots
you
of
share an
opinions at
opinion?
Continuum Ag.
We got a lot. Can you share an opinion on what impact the personnel workforce reduction at USDA will impact the 45Z program initiative? My feeling is that this disruption will be an excuse for delays.
Yeah, great question. And Russ, I think that it's important to point out kind of all the players going into this. So 45Z is a tax credit, and so it's actually the Department of Treasury that gets the final say, not the USDA. And as far as how this works, now they were going to be relying on the USDA because the USDA would have the you would think the knowledge and understanding of how to actually make this work because they understand farming practices and would understand how farmers would have to document and prove the practices. So they were relying on USDA, possibly. We don't know the inside information on that, but they were relying on the USDA to come up with their technical guidelines that the Treasury then could piggyback on. But I will say, as far as what it seems like your question's getting to, as far as USDA possibly monitoring this like a USDA program, that would not be the case. So don't think of it the same as equip or state cost share. It would be something entirely different all through the Department of Treasury. And so number of people at USDA would not necessarily impact the MRV part of this. Not unless the Department of Treasury says we need USDA to do the MRV, then that could be a different story. But as is today, really the Department of Treasury was only relying on the USDA for their recommendation, not necessarily for the facilitation. So hopefully that answers your question. So my personal opinion is that a reduction in the workforce of the USDA should not impact facilitating 45Z.
Yeah, great question though, Russ.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Let's
yeah, yeah, go ahead, Blaine.
Brad, we got time maybe to talk a little bit about GREET, and USDA feedstock calculator, some differences there, and just highlight what's going on there. Why should I pay attention to GREET? Why should I pay attention to the USDA feedstock calculator? Let's
Great
dive into that.
segue into our second bullet point. So the first bullet point was moving away from mass balance to book and claim. The second bullet point that we would be making a recommendation for the USDA, and all of this is in draft form right now, so our final comments will be coming forthcoming. But essentially, what we are going to be recommending is moving away from what the USDA came up with. They call it the FDCIC model, which is their simplified, watered down version of the GREET model. And what it looks at is a very simplified four variable model that farmers can do limited things that reduce their score, as opposed to the GREET model that takes in all different types of variables into account. So what do I mean by that? For example, fertilizer. This FDCIC, which came from the USDA recommendations at the end of 2024, that model only takes into account when did you put out fertilizer? Was it a spring application versus a fall application? It did not account for the type of fertilizer, and it did not account for the amount of fertilizer, which Blaine, that is the number one contributor for how much greenhouse gas emissions are going into the bushel is the type and the amount. So, for example, manure has a much lower carbon footprint than anhydrous. So, if you're a farmer who's doing manure versus anhydrous, theoretically and scientifically, you should have a lower carbon score for the bushels you're producing. This FDCIC model does not take that into account. All it cares about is whether you put it out in the fall or the spring. So there's a lot of flaws with this FDCIC. And I understand the trouble here. What they were trying to do was, and the whole purpose of this model that the USDA came out with was they had heard from comments earlier this past summer into the fall, simplify, simplify, simplify.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they ended up doing was, okay, let's not worry about all of the things and try and get it down to a few minimal things that we think matter. I think that they missed the mark as far as what matters. But then also in their attempt to simplify, they really didn't make the lift any easier for the farmer, because they're still requiring farmers to collect the data necessary to prove you put out fertilizer. So going back to the fertilizer example, in order to prove that I put out spring fertilizer versus fall fertilizer, they are asking, when did you put it out? What did you put out? How did you put it out?
Yep.
Show me the pictures, show me the machine data. They still require all of the data to prove that I did spring application, but they're not giving me credit if I'm put out a less amount or a type of fertilizer that has a lower carbon impact. So, but they're still requiring me to show all of my proof. So to me, that's the hard part from the farmer's perspective. It's not me telling you what I did, it's proving what I did. And so if you're going to make me prove it, then give me credit. If I'm a manure guy, I want credit for putting out manure as opposed to anhydrous. But this new model does not do that. And so for that, that's a very simplified version or reasoning, I would say. But it speaks to the FDCIC model. It was a rush job. It was a 6-month endeavor trying to get something out the door as fast as possible. by trying to adhere to let's simplify the model, but at the end of the day, they didn't actually simplify it, and they just made it. In reality, they made the farmer have artificially higher scores than what they potentially could, just because of how the model limits the variables. So, for example, on my farm, I go from like a -4 to a 15. So from the comparative to the GREEP model that takes all of those variables into account. Again, I'm a manure guy, no-till, cover crop guy, -4, typically, depending on yield. By going to this new FDCIC model, it does, since it doesn't account for manure and it doesn't account for all these other things, I jump up to a 15. So at the end of the day, this model, by simplifying, it's the same amount of work for the farmer and less bang for your buck is really what it comes down to. So that's our second recommendation, is moving away from this FDCIC model. It was a good thought, and we appreciate the effort, but the Greek model's been around since the 90s, years and years of science. It's not 100% perfect, but it's really good. And so let's go ahead and utilize that to calculate the CI scores.
Another great question here, Brad, just going on the manure theme. So I think Marilee is asking, does it account for carryover of nutrients from manure? For example, chicken litter nitrogen is part available first year with rest in years 2 and 3. She's a sales agronomist for litter and also a farmer. But, Brad, kind of on that theme of manure, at least from the USDA feedstock calculator, the FDIC, just, yeah, not friendly towards livestock farmers, really.
Yeah. So yeah, the answer directly to that would no, it wouldn't even account for the manure put on that year if you're using the USDA FDCIC. But let's look at the GREEP model though. The GREEP model would be basing all practices tied to that year. So it does not necessarily account for any type of carryover from any type of product. It only looks at during that crop year, so from harvest season to harvest season, what happened on that farm. That's why I like to think of passes, what passes happened on that field from when you went out there with the combine, that restarts the year, all the way to when you go back out and harvest that crop. So we always talk about crop years. We're currently in the 25 crop year. And so that started in the fall of 24. So it's technically 24, 25 crop year. And so that's how it's measured in the GREED model, is looking at strictly what were the things that happened on that field that contributed to that crop being grown. So for the upcoming 25 season, what was the cover crop put on in the fall of 24? What fertilizer application did you do in the fall of 24? Then moving into the spring that everyone's got their minds on now, what fertilizer was put on in the spring of 25? Planting, chemical, in-season applications, all of that would be contributing to the CI score in the GREEP model for that 2025 crop. So yeah, but great question as far as any carryover, both in the FDCIC model and the GREEP model does not account for carryover, and only the GREEP model even accounts for it at all when it comes to manure. Well, with
All right.
that, I can kind of go into our third point here. So we talked about the first 2 points as far as um, going to book and claim as opposed to mass balance, using the GREEP model as opposed to the USDA FDCIC model. And the third point is really going down to the verification level. And this is getting a little technical, but actually, technical is a key word there. The USDA came out, along with the model, they came out with what's called the technical guidelines. And that goes into the details of how does a farmer prove it, and how do you actually calculate it. And there's a lot of stuff in there that just doesn't really make sense. Uh, really, our opinion is there's a standard called ISO 14065 that kind of goes into details of what it's going to take to prove for farmers what the proof is needed. And that's what's going to be our recommendation. Take some of the good from the technical guidelines that are in correlation with ISO 14065, but then get rid of some of the stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense. And so, for example, they're requiring farmers in the technical guidelines to commit to 4 out of 5 years of no-till. So if I make a claim that my 2025 crop is no-till, I have to sign that I'm committing that field to being no-till for 4 out of the next 5 years. To us, that just doesn't really make sense as far as what we really want to focus on is what happened that year. And that was the whole point of 45Z is focusing not necessarily on the commitment. That was one of the best things about 45Z, honestly. It's not necessarily for a multi-year commitment. It's only focusing on that year. And so for us, there's a lot of stuff in the technical guidelines that kind of fall in that same vein as far as things that we just don't think make sense. And it seems like there are other politics at play, let's say, to put some of those things in there. So for us, move away from some of the things that don't make sense from a farmer standpoint, move into just strictly what are the things needed that farmers have to show their work to be able to actually get these carbon credits and so or not carbon credits but tax credits. So yeah, the third point is technically the verbiage that we're using or that we're working toward is utilize ISO 14065 guidelines as your MRV protocol and not the technical guidelines that the USDA came out with.
Yeah, great points there, Brad. I think that's key too. It's something we always chatted about with 45Z is that it's standalone and you don't have that long term being forced to stick with that practice for 4 out of 5 years. I think
Yeah. Yeah, so I
hopefully
you're
my
cutting out
Wi-Fi
there a
is
little
still
bit,
not.
Blaine. Oh, there you are.
That's what you deal with when you're on the road. So
Yeah, yeah.
apologies.
That's that's true. So I guess yeah, well, the last 2 minutes here, as far as what does this all mean for the farmer right now? And it kind of goes back to the analogy of preparation. And for us, it really comes down to since there are so many unknowns on 45Z and CI in general, I think it's still the best opportunity to be prepared for. So again, be doing the practices, document your practices. That said, there might be great opportunities, especially if I'm a farmer that's not near an ethanol facility. There are still great opportunities to participate where your data is worth something. And that's where it's still important to be collecting that data. And honestly, Blaine, this is what your guys are talking about all the time as far as what are the best opportunities for anyone to try to capitalize on that data. And so we're helping, we just launched a new program called Topsoil Connect, where we're trying, if 45Z isn't necessarily something that you're willing to wait for, or isn't something that is even practical for you as a farmer, we've got other options. And we would like to connect you to those other options. And so feel free to reach out to us anytime to kind of talk and we can go through your situation. If you're not near an ethanol facility, if you want to see what your CI score is, happy to run that. You can do all that for free at topsoil.ag. Really, it comes down to farmer just being prepared. Because again, I think this is a year more than most that a lot of guys are searching as far as what added revenue can I bring to the farm gate, and your data can bring revenue. Almost every farmer that I talk to can have some opportunity that they can try to capitalize on the data that they have. And it really depends on your situation, depends on which practices, what location. But we would love to help you out to be able to increase that revenue through the form of your data. So we never take ownership of your data. This is all 100% as far as what the farmer wants to enroll in. It'd be enrolling in separate programs outside of Continuum Ag. We don't offer our own program. We just help connect you to the ones that are most beneficial to you. So, Blaine, any closing thoughts? I know we just are hit a little bit over here.
Yeah, right here about on time. No, I would say that Brad did an excellent job really sharing where I'm at too. So feel free to contact us. We can walk through some options and a lot of people turn the focus to 2025 crops. So let's work on some things here in the wintertime and prepare for the busy season that's coming up sooner than later.
As always, it's the calm before the storm coming up. So
Right.
I'm sure everyone's going to be talking insurance here coming up once that closes in February, and then it's time to start working on those planners. So pretty exciting time.
Off for warmer weather coming around the corner,
Yeah,
right, Brad?
yeah. It's hard to think of it when it's this cold, but yes, it will be here before you know it. Absolutely.
That's right.
Love it. All right. Well, thanks so much everyone for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.